Hello and welcome back to Show and Tell. Today we're going to be talking about play, and we're going to be talking about how play is really important in childhood development, how it's important in learning, invention, creativity. But first, in true Show and Tell fashion, what you got for us today, Anna?
Well, first, I need to give, how always my
There's
items come with a little
always
story of,
a description.
that's what makes them good, okay? That's what makes them good. Because if I just show my item, then, okay. So kids, since we're talking about play today, they have a very playful way of engaging with the world, right? And this playful attitude is actually what allows them to learn. And there's a lot of research that supports this idea that kids learn while they're playing. And when they get into it, it's that actually all these little ideas start to spark that otherwise wouldn't have. So many people tend to associate play with laughter and fun and just like laughing. And that's because that's often involved in play, but we cannot just limit play to that, right? Sometimes kids engage in other kind of playful activities just for the sake of having fun. And this is great because this is kind of like a stepping stone into more serious ideas. But learning doesn't really come from laughter and fun. Learning comes from using your imagination, from trying things out, from experimenting and taking risks and, testing boundaries. And these are things that kids also do through play, but they do it through different kinds of play. So my show and tell item for today is an example of how a toy can lead to very different kinds of play and very different kinds of learning. So I brought Legos.
Nice.
We've talked about this before. I don't know if we've done it in camera, but when you think about Legos come in different ways. Before, they would come in this box and they wouldn't have instructions and kids would just throw them in the floor and just start building things. But nowadays, Legos tend to come in this like predefined kit with a model in the front that kids have to kind of replicate by following instructions. And there's a big difference between playing with Lego bricks and then playing with Lego bricks that come in this predefined kits. And I'm going to tell you why. So when kids are playing with Lego bricks from a bucket, they have the opportunity to just explore openly, right? So they can build almost anything. They can imagine different things. They can create castles. They can create dinosaurs. They can create whatever they want. And then they get to just put their creations apart and create something new. So with this kind of play, kids actually get to decide what they want to make and how they want to make it. So they're using their imagination, they're exploring, they're testing things out, and they're in this kind of endless flow of creativity. Now, let's take another example of playing with Legos, the ones that come in the predefined set. Kids are also learning, right? But they're learning to follow instructions, to build complex structures, how to plan and how to organize before building, which are also important skills. But the range of creative opportunities with that kind of, play is fairly limited, right? So when kids engage in play that comes with rules and instructions and a clear outcome, they aren't really developing to their full potential as creative thinkers, which is what you, David, and I are really interested in. So that was my show and tell. One toy, two different kinds of learning and two different kinds of play.
Did you just have Legos at your beach house?
No, I actually just ran this morning to my friend's house and I was like, I know you have Legos, right? And she did. So
I knew it. I was like, there's no way that she has Legos at her beach house.
I have nothing here. I'm in survival mode, which makes me even more creative, David. Come on, look at the things I'm pulling off.
Okay, well, here's mine. Let's see. What is this?
A funky golf pole stick.
So this is what's called a putter. Okay. So with putters, this is called a head cover, okay?
Okay.
So background on this putter. So in golf, there is this brand.
Yep.
Scotty Cameron is known as the best putter. It's like it's like the Louis Vuitton for a handbag. It's like you get a Scotty Cameron putter. It's like, this is what Tiger Woods famously used and all these sorts of things. So when I first started playing golf, I always wanted a Scotty Cameron putter, and I would never, ever, ever putt with anything else, ever. And so what Scotty Cameron does that makes them quite famous too is they're famous for these head covers. So they come out with these limited edition head
I love
covers, and
that
this
one.
one says Scotty Cameron, California, and it has a sticker on them. And then all the pros, they get a bunch of custom ones, and this head cover was gifted to me. I don't know, but it's worth something, and it was gifted to me just as a thank you for a favor. And the putter was gifted to me too, and so I wanted to bring this because for me, golf has been the biggest single source of play in my life and a huge influence. And I think a lot of what I do with writing and what I do with building a school and the level of just obsession and intensity that I bring to my work, not a lot of people have that. And I brought that to golf too. And golf is really where I learned it. And golf, there were many days where I would show up at the golf course when there were still stars in the sky, and I left when there were also stars in the sky, and the sun had gone all around the sky during the day. And what was really interesting was how in the context of play, I ended up doing things that I would have never done otherwise. So it's the only time in my life that I was really into physics. And so I wrote a short book on physics, the physics of ball flight and spin and aerodynamics, and then biomechanics, which is the study of how the body moves. And so through golf, which just felt like play to me, I got really into the science of golf and like the science of distance and how with a driver, for example, what you could do is you could change like loft and spin rates, and then you could change like the angle of attack when you'd hit the ball. And I knew all the formulas and how they all played together, and I still know those things like very, very, very well. And it's weird how that is very incongruent with the rest of my life, but I think it speaks to when you're in a space of play and the thing that you're interested in precedes what you're actually learning, you end up in a space where you learn all these things and you're like, I would have never thought I was interested in that. And so golf for me, I think is going to be a very recurring theme throughout this, because I just learned a lot about myself through golf and about the world through golf, and a lot of my skills I developed just through that course of play.
Absolutely, which is a great way to introduce the topic of the importance of play, and at the same time the decline of play that we've seen, in the past 50 years. And it's important to bring this up because hopefully when parents and other educators hear this, they start to open up more time during the day, and make play an importance, because just like it made you learn things that otherwise you probably wouldn't, it works really well, and it's such a crucial part. And it reminds me of, okay, you know who Peter Gray is? He is one of my favorite authors. He wrote Free to Learn, right? So he's a very well-respected research psychologist who studies kids' natural way of learning, but from a biological and like an evolutionary perspective, right? And I'm a big fan of his work that suggests that kids are biologically designed to educate themselves through self-directed play and exploration. And at first, when I heard this, I was like, well, how much can kids learn through play, right? And then I realized that not all kind of play leads to valuable learning experiences, right? All play is good, but there's some kinds of play that lead to more learning than others. So he just dedicated much of his life to doing research around this topic and studying different communities like the hunter-gatherers, and all his research indicated that we don't need to educate kids. Adults just have to provide the right conditions that allow kids to educate themselves through play. And then, like we've talked before, provide the resources and kind of like the guidance. So according to Peter Gray, one of the reasons why kids aren't learning nowadays and why there's so much anxiety, and it's because with the years, we've reduced the amount of time that kids get to play. And we've replaced it with compulsory schooling and with overscheduling of adult-led activities. And I know, and we'll briefly talk about those in a moment. But 50 years ago, and this was really interesting, school wasn't the big deal that it is today. So the school year was actually 5 weeks shorter than it is right now. And the school day lasted about 6 hours. But out of those 6 hours, at least 2 hours in elementary school, 2 hours were dedicated to play. So kids had 30 minutes in the morning for recess, 30 minutes in the afternoon, and an entire hour during the day for lunch. And during that hour, they could decide where they wanted to have lunch, with whom, or if they wanted to eat quickly, play. Like, they had a saying over their 2 hours of play, right? And at least in elementary school, homework was unheard of. And all this like adult-led after-school activities that we know today weren't as popular back then. So when kids finished school, they went home and they had plenty of time to play. As we know, all this has changed with compulsory schooling. Recess has been cut to the point where it's merely inexistent. We talked about last time how in my past school, like kids had 15 minutes of recess, and you said, that's not even enough time to decide what game you want to play, right? And the same with lunchtime. Like in many elementary schools, lunch is strictly controlled by either a teacher or the lunch monitors. And in many schools, they're doing even quiet lunches, which is just absurd, just to kind of like keep everything under control. So all these things, and then all this after school activities that kids are so busy nowadays. I don't know if you've spoken to a kid lately, David, but when I would talk to my kids, they had like at least 2 activities that they had to do after school, and most of them were not even chosen by them. So she's like, my mom enrolled me in chess, and then my mom enrolled me in this, and I don't want to go to karate, and I'm like, oh my gosh, if it wants to play a game or an after school or something, then that's great, obviously. But if you're forcing your kid to do something just to kind of fill their schedule, then there's something wrong there, because kids need more time for free play. Like people who say that kids need more schooling or more things in order to learn have it all the way backwards. Like I really believe that kids need less schooling and more time to explore and play, right? And I want to push it even further and say that we should be engaging kids in the right kinds of play that lead to creative opportunities.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, one of the first things is just you hit the nail on the head of just how much of life now is adult-led. And even play now and your habits and your hobbies, they all have to be tied to some kind of college degree or whatever. And the thing is, we've gotten down this Western virus where we think that if something isn't directly tied into some agenda or outcome, then it's just not worth it. Mm-hmm. There's a book that I really like called Why Greatness Can't Be Planned. And it basically just outlines the history of this science experiment. And it goes into the experiment was sort of this collaborative experiment to make an art project. But what they ended up with was so cool because at every single stage, they didn't really know where they were going. And it's like so much of life is like that. Like, when we're taking 8-year-olds and we're like, you need to do this so that you can get into middle school, and you do well in middle school so you can get into high school, and high school into college, and then college, real life, you have to work so hard the entire time. Who knows? Who knows?
Exactly.
Right? No. I mean, the thing that got me into college was this thing, being able to play golf. We had no idea that was the case when I was 10 years old, and I wish that I had way more time to go play. But I think that there's a couple things here. Like, even that the play that we have now is this artificially restricted, bubble-wrapped play where it's like, yeah, you can go to summer camp, but now the parents and the counselors, really, they deal with all the fights in summer camp. Like, there isn't just, we've lost this ability for parents to just let kids go.
Mm-hmm. You actually shared a picture with me that you shared in Monday Musing too, of this playground back in, what year was that?
1900.
Imagine the difference, and I'm actually going to include it in this video, like a playground in 1900, and then you think of a playground nowadays, and it's insane how playgrounds nowadays are so controlled, from the environment to make them safer to adults actually imposing rules. Like, this is the way you need to play soccer. This is the way, like, we want to just control everything. And it's crazy because through play and through that free play, kids learn about the dangers out there, but in a safer place, right? They're learning, like back then. And they learn, how to get along with other kids. They learn how to have different points of view. They learn how to settle their own arguments. Like, these are all important things that kids need to learn. And if we let them learn those things through play, which is what they do best, then we're doing them a service, right? But so many parents and teachers think that by intervening and trying to control the situation and control play, they're doing them a favor, and it's the opposite. And it made me think of, on Fridays, and when I used to teach, we did this thing called choice time. So every Friday we had an hour to celebrate the week where kids got to like play different games in the classroom, and I would play with them too. And at first, I was like, okay, so that kids are not always playing the same games and with the same kids. I'm going to organize this. I'm going to put them into groups, and I'm going to put the games out there, and I'm going to assign them to different groups. And that was like the worst idea I've ever had in my life. Like, I came in, I had like an hour of work doing that the night before, thinking it was going to be the best idea. I show up and the kids are like, what are you doing? Like, why are you choosing who I'm going to be playing with during choice time? It's supposed to be my choice. Like, why are you choosing what games I'm going to be playing? And obviously, I quickly realized this was a terrible idea. And just we went back to kids choosing what they want to play and choosing, who they wanted to play with. And I was recently reading that Howard Gardner, is that how you pronounce his name?
Yep.
Yeah, who identified two primary styles of play, right? So he identified that there were the patterners and the dramatist. So the patterners are the kids that are fascinated by structures and by patterns, and these are the ones who tend to play with like blocks and things like that. And then you have the dramatist, that I believe it's kind of you, who are interested in stories and in social interaction. So these are the kids that play with stuffed animals or with like little things, and they make up their own stories. And then when I read that, I was like, wow, that I could quickly think of the names of the students in my class who would fall in those categories. So when I would say choice time, you always had the same group of kids who would run to the corner where we had the class puzzle. I don't know if I've told you this, but I'm really into puzzles. I love puzzles. So we always, the entire year had a different puzzle like in the corner of the room. And you always had the kids who now I identify as the patterners, who like love to like put little things together and like organize things and, just love structure, who would go there. And then when that, a puzzle wasn't available, they would immediately go to the Jenga blocks, but they wouldn't use them to play Jenga. They would use them to build different things. And then you always had the group of kids who did not pick any game. They would go to the rug, and the entire time they would make up a play, they would make up a scene, and it was all like role playing. And at the end of choice time, they were always like, Miss Fab, let me present to you like what we made up. And those were clearly the dramatists, right? The ones that were interested in the stories. Mm-hmm. So it just made me realize that not only do we need to provide kids with opportunities to play and to engage in the kind of play that are going to let them to be more, practice their creativity, but also identify what kind of style your kid has of playing, to make sure that you provide those kind of games, but also provide the other types so that they have a taste of, what's out of their comfort zone, right? Because both things, you develop different skills and different kinds of creativity by playing both as a dramatist and as a patterner. So I just thought that was really interesting.
Mm-hmm. I really feel like I have a lot of elements of both, because I do love structure, but I also love stuffed animals. I used to build airports. So I had, and probably still have somewhere, hundreds of model airplanes. Hundreds. And every time we flew, we'd buy a new model airplane. And so like when I have the money to do it and I finally can sit down, I am going to have like the world's coolest model airplane collection. Someday it's going to happen. There's going to be hundreds of them, super high quality, every single kind of airplane. And even now, I'm always playing. I was sitting at the park the other day, and I have this little park in San Francisco where I just go and just hang out. And I saw an airplane in the sky, and I can immediately go Boeing 787, British Airways, going to Heathrow. And then I look up Flight Tracker on my phone, get it perfectly right, or just get it wrong. Like I got that thing wrong. Where's the plane coming from? And so actually, even in Brooklyn, like the play never ends. Play is just part of life for any creative person. Every apartment in Brooklyn, I insisted on being under the flight path to go to LaGuardia, because I just love planes. And I know all the flight paths. I know that the wheels coming into 28 left and right into SFO, right over the Dumbarton Bridge. And it's just like, for me, the fact that we try to silence these very human things. Yes. Oh, is there any rhyme or reason to this? No. And who cares? Who cares? Right. These are the things that make me happy.
Right. No, totally. And you and I have that in common. We do have like this very playful personality, and yeah, we're always seeking to make things fun, in certain extent, right? And we've talked about how things have become really serious, and we've had many instances, like with Show and Tell, for example, whenever we're stuck or I can't come up with something, or I'm not being creative, or I just try to have a fun conversation with you. We try to just be ourselves, and then something will come up, and then creativity suddenly kind of like happens. Why don't we talk about how creativity tends to flourish when you're in that playful state, or in that playful state?
So I have a friend, his name is Chris, and his roommate's name is Eric Lewis. Eric Lewis is one of the top 5 piano players in the entire world. No hyperbole, top 5. And he has invented a whole new style of playing piano. And what he's done is he's gone into the piano and he recreated how his piano actually plays so that he can play new kinds of sounds and borrow from different kinds of music and musical inspirations in order to actually push forward the frontier of music and really a piano. And under no rational or analytical framework does it make sense for some curious guy to open up the hood on his piano and start plucking around at stuff. But that's what he's done, and he's able to get sounds that nobody else has done. And what's amazing about play is it's just randomness. Random stuff happens, you turn your judgmental mind off, and that's you get this flowering of incredible music.
And that, I feel like that can happen when there's, like you said, no structure, no rules in place, no, like when you just have like the space for open exploration. And I recently shared that the Danish have two different words for play. And I think that's great because in English we have, the Danish people. Is that how you pronounce?
Danish.
Danish. Okay. I kind of had a feeling that I wasn't going to, but I just went for it. Anyway, so they have two words. I'm not going to pronounce them correctly, but I'm going to try. So one is spill, S-P-I-L-L-E. And this word describes the type of play that is very defined and structured, and you have a set of rules. So for example, playing sports, you have structure, you have rules, or playing a board game, or playing some video game that, there are like certain things you have to do. And through this kind of play, kids do learn to like solve different problems and how to get along with others and see different points of view and follow instructions, right? So there is a fun component to that play, and there's also a learning component to that play. But then they have another word, and I don't know if I'm going to pronounce it right, but it's ledge, L-E-G, right? And they use this word to describe play that's more imaginative and play that's more open-ended and where there's no like explicit goal. And this kind of play requires the combination that we were talking about of curiosity, imagination, experimentation, like your friend who did that with the piano, which is most likely what's going to help kids develop as creative thinkers, right? And it made me think out of, these two different definitions of play, how nowadays, kids have started to spend most of their time playing on computers, right? And this actually presents an opportunity to be for creative play and for creative learning. But many of the new on-screen play activities feel more like those, spill definition of play, where they have like a set of rules and a set of things that you need to do, and everyone's doing the same thing, rather than that ledge definition of play where it's more open-ended. So, for example, many of the video games we see nowadays, kids have to learn how to like navigate a world and how to score certain points and how to advance levels. But there are few opportunities for them to imagine new possibilities, right? And that's the component of play that leads to creativity. So when you have opportunities to be creative, when you have opportunities to set your own goals or to invent your own activities within the game, those are the components of play that lead to creative outcomes. So playing with technology should not only involve interacting with it, but designing and creating and experimenting and exploring within it. And I thought of a few examples of video games that actually allow for kids to work on their creative side. Are you familiar with Minecraft? You must be, because it's like one of the most popular video games nowadays. My kids were obsessed with Minecraft. But anyway, if you've ever seen Minecraft, there's like a variety of ways to play that game. So kids can build their own virtual structures within the game. They can craft their own tools, and they can even design actual games within the game. So I recently saw this kid that did like design a Pac-Man game that he came up with inside the Minecraft game. So this is the kind of example that you're playing a video game, but you're not just following a set of rules. Like, it has space for you to be creative within the game. And another example, and you have to be familiar with this one, I was obsessed. Like, I've never been obsessed with video games when I was little, but I was obsessed with this one, and I would play on my computer. SimCity. Yes. How did you know? Yes.
I just knew it. I just knew it. I was waiting. I was like, how is she going to set this one up? And I was like, SimCity. Yes. Got it.
You got it. So I was obsessed with like creating my own city and like being in charge and building like the different zones and managing the money correctly, making sure that, the taxes were being managed so that everyone in the city was fine. And in retrospect, I realized that I never built the same city twice. And there was like always something to improve, something to do differently next time around. So SimCity is also an example of a video game that is limited only by your own creativity, right? So that's another example of a game that you can do that. And then I recently, well, not recently, kind of like 6 months ago, came across Scratch. Have you heard of Scratch?
With the programming interface?
Yeah, from the project of Lifelong Kindergarten,
Yeah.
a group at MIT. So through Scratch, kids can like program their own interactive stories, and I'm going to tell you how it's different from other like programming games, right? They can craft their own interactive stories and games and animations, and they can share their creations with like the online community, which it's actually one of my favorite parts of Scratch. The online community is amazing, and Scratch is different from like most coding websites that I've seen because the other websites are kind of constrained by a set of activities that help kids learn specific coding concepts. But in Scratch, you don't really have that. Like kids have the liberty to create their own things, and they're in charge of their games. And that's the kind of learning activities that I think that parents should be pushing their kids to pursue.
Do you ever play Roller Coaster Tycoon?
Mm-mm.
That was a fun one. So that one, you would build an amusement park.
How did I miss that one?
No, it was so fun. Like you would build concession stands and you would build roller coasters. It was a lot like SimCity, but just for amusement parks. Like you try to make money and all these sorts of things. I had this one game called Airline. It was just called Airline. And you would build an airline. And I remember like I ended up building a big hub in Malaga because Spain, I determined, was a very efficient place to route airplanes through, because the problem with London was it was too far north, and so Spain, by being further south, made more sense with flights from South America and Central America, and it was on the same latitude as who knows, 2.5 decades on this planet, still doesn't know what's wrong with this guy. And so and so I determined that was like a good place to go play and have my hub. And it's so funny. I spent so much time as a kid playing, and what I'm trying to think about is there some kind of framework for useful play versus useless play? And so when your kid wants to go do these things, because I guess that they shape me in some way, but I don't really know how, and maybe they actually revealed who I was a little bit more. Somebody, like, maybe that's what it was, right? Maybe there's an aspect of childhood that is just about, what if, this is more of a thought experiment, what if a lot of who you are and what you're going to become is just innate? And so maybe what play does, rather than introducing you to things, it does some of that, but what if it actually just reveals these things to you? And so maybe if it's just about the revelatory nature, then play is the thing that allows you to learn who you are. Maybe play actually has this revelatory nature. And I'm quite concerned when you talk to a lot of people who are 28, 30, and they say, I don't know what I want to do with my life. Even the number of people at 22 to 24 who say that is astonishingly large. And there's something going on there that's a bit weird. It shouldn't be like that. That really implies a lack of self-awareness and a lack of experimentation. It implies that you've just done what everybody else has said. And geez, that is not a recipe for a happy life.
And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that kids are very playful, and I'm going to talk about in a second the difference between play and playfulness. But kids are very playful, like that's just their nature. And the problem is that they enter into this like very rigid system that it's the opposite of play, right? And it kind of like conditions them out of this playful nature, and then they end up, what's the point of life if you don't see the joy and the fun in the things that you're doing, right? And it doesn't mean that it's all fun and games, but you need to be able to preserve this playful attitude. And John Dewey was the one who shifted the focus from play, like the activity, to playfulness, the attitude, and claims that playfulness is actually more important than play. So playfulness is, again, the attitude of the mind of being playful, and play is just passing outward manifesto of this attitude. And it made me realize realized that it's not that I'm playing all day, but I am a very playful person. Like, it's just in my personality. And I've always been like this since little. Like, I was the comedian in the family, and I was the mischief maker, and I was always the one trying to make people laugh. And I mean, nowadays, like, my friends come over and they're always like, you don't walk, you're always dancing, you're jumping around. Like, I hear you talking to Fernando, my husband, and I'm like singing and this and that. And it's just the way that I am. Like, even in days where I'm not in my best state, like, I'm still playing around. And I think that I never lost that playful attitude, even though I went to school and traditional schooling, because my mom is very much like that. So I would see her being super playful. So I just, I'm very playful as well, even as an adult. And I think that since I didn't lose that, that's really what made me an effective teacher. And that's what made me connect instantly with my students. And it's so interesting when I look back and I think, every time I read the notes that they write to me and the videos that they would make and all this, the thing that they would always bring up is Ms. Fabrega is so playful, and we have so much fun, and the jokes and the games, and those are the things that kids remember. Those are the things that kids are paying attention to. So it's very unfortunate that school kind of like misses that and focuses on the rigid and the structure and other things, because we already know that kids learn through this play when they're in this playful state, and they're more creative when they're in this playful state, and they're going to be happier adults if they continue to nourish this playful personality.
So your teachers must have despised that. My teachers hated how much I played. I mean, it was just the antithesis of everything. It was, no, go sit down in your chair, stop experimenting. And even in the way that we've designed rite of passage, it has always been to encourage a level of play. What's really fun about play is very closely intertwined with interestingness. And so I can't play unless something is interesting. For example, I always say that if I don't enjoy editing my writing, then my writing, how is it going to be interesting enough to other people? And in trying to make things just interesting, meaning playful to myself, like, you wouldn't really expect that to be with that, then that has then made my own writing a lot more interesting. And it's wild how students are quite uncomfortable when we say, write about whatever you want this week. They really need a prompt. And that's fine. It's not a criticism of any student. It's much more of the system. But students just sort of assume that if you come to class, you're going to have a prompt, and you have to do what the teacher says. And I just feel like half of Rite of Passage is like, we're not going to be pissed at you if you don't do everything. And you can write about what you want. And actually, by following what's interesting, then you will end up where you want to be. And we talk about this paper. It's a Cornell University paper from 2008 called Driven by Compression Progress. And the whole point of the paper is that humans are driven by compression progress, which basically means that what we try to do is take the vast amount of ideas in the world and we try to compress it. And so that a useful intellectual insight is something that compresses a lot of ideas in something that's pithy. And you see this everywhere. And I was even talking to Becca, who's my personal assistant, and she says that actually when she edits music, when the music is compressed, a lot of the sounds just fall right into place. So even technically in the music software, when you compress music and sounds, a lot of things just fall into place, which I thought was fascinating. But the ultimate form of compression is E equals MC squared. That, in that little formula, explains so much about how the world works. And so that's what we're trying to do. But even Einstein himself, if he talks about his childhood, was talking about how he was fascinated by the way that light could bend and the way that light waves came into his room. And you can't divorce E equals MC squared from the idea of him just being this kid. And it gets into, like, my prediction, total prediction, is the person who discovers cancer will not be trying to discover cancer. I'm telling you right now. It will be somebody who's trying to do something else, and they're going to end up curing cancer by being on some other path. There's this weird thing about the world, and I don't know what it is, because also the answer isn't just be a total dilettante and have no orientation. That's also not the answer. But there's this weird thing about the world that you end up discovering things in very oblique ways, and you end up having your insights by not quite trying to hit those things, but then still at the same time you're sort of orbiting around these concentric circles of interests. I don't really know what's going on there, but like big breakthroughs, you can't actually take them head on, because almost by definition, if you knew where you were going, it wouldn't be a breakthrough. And so Eric Weinstein talks about the difference between genius and excellence. And excellence is what we're good at training. So excellence is things that are very well defined, and we know exactly what doing it well looks like. And excellence is something like playing music at a really high level, doing math that is already known math at a really high level, swinging a golf club at a really high level. But then what genius is genius is being able to do things that are one of a kind, and that are these breakthroughs that no one else could have come up with. So if excellence is about hitting targets that other people can see and hitting the bullseye, genius is about hitting targets that nobody even knows about. And so the entire orientation of school is around excellence, and we have forgotten about genius.
And the way that we can get kids more toward genius is by having them play, for example, with Legos that come in a bucket. If our goal is excellence, then you go and you give kids Legos that come in those predefined kits, and you have them follow instructions and make the model perfectly. So I think this is a perfect place to wrap up our conversation with this frame of mind that yes, we need to give kids more opportunities to play, but we need to give them the right kinds of play, the kind of play that will lead to more creative thinking. Because nowadays we don't need, rule followers anymore. Like those are not the kind of jobs that kids are going to have in the future. We need creators, right? We need people who can think outside the box and, like you said, come up with like that one thing that nobody has created. And that will happen through play and free exploration and through making. Yeah. And this last thought, that learning is at the intersection of playing and making. That's something that I've realized. And that's why I'm so passionate about, helping kids have fun and enjoy, the process while they're making something. And through that, they're going to be learning.
Yeah, that was such a fun episode. It was really just enjoyable. And I think that one of the things that we have very consciously done in Show and Tell is we actually came up with Show and Tell to start every episode with a sense of play. Like, that's why we call it Show and Tell. That's why, like, even when we designed the typography of it and everything, like, we wanted to resist an ultra serious show so that we could just come up with new ideas as we spoke. And if you try to pursue creativity, you're gonna be inventive. But if you try to pursue innovation, you're not necessarily gonna be creative. And it is through play that creativity happens. Like, play is an end in itself, because the intuitive mind of what you think is interesting has usefulness. And I worry that as a society, we have stopped respecting the intuition. We've stopped respecting play. And as a result, we're not getting the same kinds of genius level ideas that we very well could. We are stripping people of human agency by banning play. And
we're here to fix that
with more play. Really, really could.
We'll see you next time.
See you next week.
Next week. All right.